Yeah, and I dealt, and as you mentioned, I mean, there's three main female characters in my book. My book, by the way, I was accused of white supremacy, which is now just kind of like whatever. It's just now everybody calls everybody white supremacy. But the three main characters in my book are Bernadette, who lived in the Congo and is suffering these trade-offs, Suparti, who left the farm for working in factories in Indonesia, and my wife, Helen. They're all women of color. And they all sort of describe these stages of development and why economic development is good for them as individual human beings and is good in and of itself. And as it turns out, is actually good for the natural environment too.
Yeah, this chapter, Sweatshops Save the Planet, that's subchapter actually. I figured that would make you a lot of friends. So how do sweatshops save the planet exactly? How do you justify a statement like that?
Well, I wrote this because in the late 1990s, I was working on an activist campaign to criticize Nike for its factory conditions in Indonesia. And 20 years later, I went back to Indonesia to see how things were, just to see what the impacts were. And my views totally changed. Factories, and this has been going on for 250 years, women move from the farms where they are basically servants to their parents, the servant class of their parents. They move to the cities and it's just liberation. Yes, the life and working in the factory is really hard. I mean, it's terrible.
Not compared to subsistence living on a farm.
But not compared to subsistence living on a farm. And Suparti, who's the factory worker who I profile here, she has her own scooter. She has her own home. She's like in her early 20s. She can marry whoever she wants. I mean, amazing, right? She's a Muslim, still Muslim, but she's left behind by coming to the city, the traditional practice of arranged marriage.
Yeah, well, that's part of that unconscious worship of those sort of Ewok villages that you described. And the only person who would think that subsistence farming is somehow like a utopian goal is only someone who's so far removed from a farm that all they have in their head are images from children's books about like fairy tale villages, something like that. Because it's just so... Go ahead.
It's like Elizabethan. I always joke that it's always, the utopias are always like Elizabethan England. There's always like a Renaissance fair going on at the same time, and everyone's, and there, now, there's a kernel of truth in it, in that when you go to Africa, when you go to really poor parts of sub-Saharan Africa, as I did the day before I saw incredible endangered monkeys, you're walking through villages that don't have any electricity, and there was a church service going on, and they started singing, and I was just like, oh, it is as romantic and beautiful. And, when there's not electronic radios blaring and whatever, now in that same village, infant mortality is really high. In that same village, the opportunities for women are very low. Not to mention, if you're gay, I mean, you can't be gay in those villages. You could be killed. So, there is something that does get lost with modernity. But absolutely, the stuff that you gain has been completely forgotten and nobody remembers it. I wouldn't have known it had I not been a radical socialist in my teenage years and went to Nicaragua to help the Sandinistas. I worked in Brazil to help the anarchist landless workers movement. And, you would meet young people and you'd start talking to them and they'd be like, hey, how do I get to the city? Yeah. And it would be like, you'd be like, well, we're trying to create a workers cooperative here, and be like, yeah, man, I just want to get to the university in the city. Can you figure out how I can do that? And that changed me. And working alongside folks as they're clearing rainforest.
Yeah, that's fun. Brutal. I picked rocks when I was a kid. I've tried to take stumps out of the ground. You do that for a week or two and just see how far you get. Picking rocks out of a field, that's quite the entertaining work. So...
yeah, it makes you much more grateful for not just your own life, but also for this incredible process that we call development, and which is really just urbanization and industrialization. So I wanted Apocalypse Never to sort of remind people, introduce that reality to people, and also to see that it's not the case where the picture people have is that you industrialize and then you destroy nature. No, it's subsistence agriculture at the forest frontier, which is driving the destruction of critical habitats.
And that means poverty. Isn't that so cool, though? Isn't that so cool when you step back and look at it? It's like, oh, poverty is causing a tremendous amount of environmental damage. So if we could make people rich and make things better biologically, let's say, more sustainable. And actually the way to do the latter is to do the former. Make people rich as fast as you possibly can. Then they start to care. It's like,
absolutely.
And then you say that to people, it's like resistance. It's like, oh, I see. You don't want people to be rich on a healthy planet. So what's up with you exactly, if that's bugging you? What's going on? Because that's a good goal. And all the smart environmentalists I've talked to, Lomborg is like at the pinnacle of that in many ways. They all come to that conclusion. And Marion Tupy as well. It's like, well, no, if you look at what happens, you educate women, birth rate plummets, and that'll actually be a problem in 100 years because there won't be enough people rather than too many. But that happens instantly, even in one generation. And so that's the solution to population control, assuming we needed that. And so that's in alignment with every feminist's goal. And then as you get people out of this slash and burn agricultural cycle, well, they start to be more efficient in their use of resources, and they're not living hand to mouth. And so you make people rich and they become environmentalists. It's like, okay, that isn't what we've been told, but that's how it works.
I wanted to, with Apocalypse Never, I wanted to build on the work that Bjorn and others have done. I feel like sometimes what people hear when they read those analyses is they hear, well, you're saying we should just get rich, and then with our wealth, we can buy environmental quality. And I wanted to paint a better picture of it, unpack it. I think cost-benefit analyses have a lot of good, but they hide a lot of assumptions. And I think those assumptions need to be unpacked for people. So the issue is that, how is it that becoming rich saves the environment? Well, it's because Bernadette in the Congo gets to move to the city. And when you ask Bernadette, hey, would you like to live in the city and have a job at a factory? She's like, hell yes. Is there one? No, that's the problem in Congo. But it's not like the picture that people have, which comes in part from Marx, it's in Capital, the tragedy, or not the tragedy, the Commons.
The dark satanic mills.
Yes, exactly. It's this picture that like these happy subsistence farmers have been forced into slave-like conditions in the factories, when 9 times out of 10, it's the opposite. They would like to go to the cities. They're wanting to go to the cities to get those opportunities. And then when they leave their frankly low productive, crappy little farm behind, much of the time it just reverts to grassland and forests. So so stop crying about the loss of the family farm. I say this because I'm gonna break my mom's heart, because we lost the family farm in our generation. But for many people, losing the family farm is fine. Like they're just like, it was terrible, for much of the world. And then it reverts to grasslands and forests. And
just like it has in North America. I mean, so much marginal farmland. I know, I don't remember how many more percentage-wise trees there are in the Northern Hemisphere since 100 years ago, but it's like 40%. And then that's another thing that's really interesting is that, and that you don't hear much about, is that a huge chunk of the planet has greened over the last 20 years too. I think it's an area the size of the US. It's some staggering amount of land anyways. And that just never comes up. It's like, and the idea, I didn't know as well until about 6 or 7 years ago that we're in all likelihood going to peak at about 9 billion people. And then it's like, that's going to plummet real fast, like really fast by all appearances. And so, and we can certainly sustain a population of 9 billion, as far as I can tell, without wreaking environmental havoc, especially as we get smarter technologically. And that's happening so fast that we can't even keep up with it.